The man who never looked back until that moment. The air inside the grand theater shimmered with quiet excitement. Lights dimmed, and the murmurs of an eager crowd echoed beneath the velvet-draped ceiling. The world had gathered to celebrate cinema's greatest night, but no one was more watched, more loved, or more whispered about than the quiet man standing behind the curtain, Keanu Reeves. Dressed in a simple black suit, no glitter, no flash, he stood still, hands folded, listening to the muffled applause beyond the curtains. To the world, he was an enigma, a man of few words, fewer controversies, and even fewer demands. Yet, tonight, as he prepared to walk on stage to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award, something in his chest felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the memories clawing their way back, or maybe it was the realization that this stage, this spotlight, had taken him so far from where he had begun. Keanu's journey had never been easy. He had known loss far too early. His father had walked out when he was just 3. His childhood was carved from fragments of loneliness and sudden moves. His mother, Patricia, raised him and his sister with the strength of 1,000 storms. She worked 3 jobs, stitched clothes late into the night, skipped meals so he could eat, and believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. She had been the stagehand in the shadows of his life, quietly lifting him forward, unseen by the crowds that cheered only when he succeeded. Now, decades later, he was moments away from being honored on the same stage that had once rejected him. The host's voice boomed from beyond the curtain, calling out his name with grandeur. The audience rose, clapping, cheering, a wave of love crashing toward him. But as he stepped forward, something stopped him cold. A face, familiar, aged, gentle. In the middle of the front row, barely visible between 2 flashing cameras, was his mother. She hadn't told him she was coming. She hadn't needed to. There, she was, wearing the same soft smile she always wore when she saw him do something simple. Not win awards, not appear in films, but just when he smiled, or remembered to wear socks, or called her back. Her eyes were wet, not from pride, but something else, something Keanu couldn't name just yet. He stood frozen behind the curtain. The applause went on. He did not move. The stage manager whispered sharply, "You're on now." But Keanu didn't hear it. The world around him faded. In that one glance, he was no longer the world-famous actor, the action star, or the silent soul of Hollywood. He was once again the small boy sitting at the foot of their kitchen table, watching his mother rub her aching feet after a 12-hour shift, whispering stories of the stars, telling him, "You'll touch them one day, baby." He took a slow breath, his fingers trembling. Then, in a moment that would become the most talked-about moment of the night, Keanu Reeves did not walk onto the stage. Instead, he stepped down from the platform, past the cameras, past the glowing lights, past the rows of stunned celebrities. He walked straight into the crowd, every head turning, gasps rising like smoke. He didn't explain. He didn't speak. He only moved, slow, certain, unstoppable. And then, in front of everyone, he kneeled down beside his mother and took her hand. His other hand reached into his coat pocket, pulling out something small, wrapped in a delicate red cloth. A necklace. Not of diamonds or gold, but of shells. 3 small ocean shells strung together by string, worn and faded. He had made it for her in 2nd grade. She used to wear it every time she picked him up from school, no matter how old he got, no matter how many people laughed. He gently tied it around her neck, then whispered something only she could hear. She smiled. She wept. The entire hall fell, silent. On stage, the host stood speechless. The cameras didn't know what to focus on, but the world had seen something more valuable than any award. They had seen the heart behind the man. They had seen a son remember his mother. Not when it was convenient, but when the world demanded his attention most. And just as he turned to finally walk toward the stage, his mother tugged his hand softly. Her voice, shaky but full of truth, said, Don't go up there for them. He paused. Go up there for your sister. The mention of his sister jolted something inside him, a memory long buried, suddenly vivid. His steps slowed. His heart raced. He turned back toward her, confusion on his face. But her eyes had already looked away. His sister, Kim. His best friend, his childhood protector, the one who fought leukemia for over a decade. She had been the quiet force behind his strength. He thought she was doing well. She hadn't told him anything new. Nothing had changed. Or had it? Why had his mother said that? Why now? Keanu Reeves stood in the aisle of the Grand Theater, the spotlight no longer his concern. His mind was somewhere else. Something was wrong. He knew it now. And in that moment, everything changed. The whisper that cracked his world as the hall tried to return to its rhythm. Keanu Reeves stood still, his back half turned to the stage, the crowd still holding their breath. Applause had faded into an eerie quiet, and yet the silence screamed, louder than any ovation. The host awkwardly cleared his throat, unsure whether to continue the ceremony or wait for the man who had just unraveled the night's perfection with a single human act. But Keanu wasn't listening. His mind was spiraling, trying to steady itself against the weight of 6 words his mother had whispered. Go up there for your sister. Those words weren't poetic. They weren't part of a planned speech. They were a quiet alarm, one that rattled in the corners of his memory, dragging with it moments he had tried to forget. Hospital rooms, whispered prayers, midnight drives to nowhere, and Kim's exhausted smile pretending everything was fine. Keanu slowly walked back to his mother, crouched beside her again, his voice low but sharp with concern. What did you mean? He asked. Her eyes flickered. For the first time all night, she looked away. It was a small movement, but it told him everything. A mother didn't look away from her child unless the truth was too painful to speak. Her fingers clutched her handbag tightly, knuckles pale, lips trembling. She didn't want to tell you, she said softly. Not before tonight. She didn't want to ruin this. Keanu's chest tightened. Ruin what? He whispered, but he already knew the answer. It wasn't about the award. It wasn't about the moment. It was about the fact that Kim had always protected him, even when she was the one in pain. His mother finally looked into his eyes, and her voice cracked. It's back, Keanu. The cancer's back, and this time, it's worse. The theater. Around him seemed to vanish, faces blurred, colors dimmed, the warmth in his hands faded. He felt a cold numbness creeping into his spine, like an invisible hand was pulling him away from the ground beneath him. For a second, he thought he might fall. He had seen death. He had lived with grief. But nothing prepared him for the idea that he might lose her. Again. He had fought beside her the first time, slept in hospital chairs, whispered lullabies to distract her from the pain, fed her ice chips when she couldn't swallow. And they had won. Or so he thought. Now it had returned, not with a roar, but in silence, in secrecy, a quiet thief waiting until his back was turned. Keanu looked up, eyes scanning the rows, and then he saw her. Kim, seated quietly, at the far end of the third row, hidden behind 2 executives and a journalist. She looked radiant as always, wrapped in a soft blue shawl, her hair pinned back with care, a faint smile dancing on her lips as if nothing in the world could shake her. But now, he saw it, the truth hidden behind the makeup and the careful posture, the weight in her shoulders, the shadows under her eyes, the slight tremor in her fingers as she clutched the small purse in her lap. It was a performance, but not for cameras, for him, for their mother, for everyone who still saw her as the miracle girl who beat the odds. Without another word, Keanu rose and walked down the aisle. The crowd tried to regain its energy, offering nervous claps, thinking maybe he was finally going to accept his award. but he didn't even glance at the stage. Instead, he stepped past the spotlight and made his way directly to Kim. She looked up, caught mid-breath, her smile faltering as she realized he knew. He knelt beside her, the theater lights catching the moisture in his eyes. But he didn't try to speak. He just took her hand and kissed it, then pulled her gently into his arms. The cameras, unsure what to focus on, captured the embrace. But no lens could capture the pain that passed silently between brother and sister in that moment. It wasn't dramatic. It was real. Two people holding on to each other as the world around them tried to act normal. Then, in a voice only she could hear, Keanu said, "Why didn't you tell me?" She didn't cry. Not then. She simply rested her head against his shoulder and whispered, "Because I didn't want to see that look on your face." He stayed there, holding her, blocking the show, defying every plan the producers had made. And the world, for once, let him. Even the host stayed quiet. Sometimes people just know when something is bigger than the script. The moment stretched on, long and fragile, and when Keanu finally stood, he looked toward the stage, not as a man being honored, but as a man with a mission. He walked slowly, without fanfare, took the mic from the host's trembling hands, and faced the crowd. For a moment, he didn't speak. He looked across the sea of faces, the same industry that had built him up and broken him down more times than he could count. And then, finally, he spoke. Calm, clear, full of the weight he now carried. "I was going to come up here tonight and thank everyone who helped me get here. But the truth is, only two people ever did. My mother and my sister." The crowd held its breath. "My sister is fighting again. And if I'm going to thank anyone tonight, it's her. Not for her strength, but for letting me borrow it when I had none of my own. There was no music cue, no teleprompter, just silence, then applause, slow, uncertain at first, but then full, thunderous." Keanu looked down once more at Kim. She smiled, touched her heart, and mouthed two words he would never forget. Go home. And that night, as the world talked about his speech, his award, and his grace, Keanu Reeves disappeared from the after-party, skipped every interview, and left the spotlight behind. He got in a simple black car with his mother and his sister and drove away. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this time, Kim had made a choice that would change everything. A choice she hadn't yet told anyone. The letter beneath her pillow, the hospital room was quiet. Too quiet for someone like Kim Reeves, whose laughter used to echo through every space she entered. Outside the window, the sun filtered through grey clouds, casting a soft, sleepy glow on the walls. Keanu sat beside her bed, watching the rise and fall of her chest as she dozed, her hand resting in his like it had when they were children. He had barely left her side since the night of the awards. No more premieres, no photo calls, no signed contracts. He had pressed pause on everything, and for the first time in years, the world had respected that. People whispered about his sudden disappearance, but he didn't care. Fame could wait. Fame. His sister couldn't. Kim stirred, her eyelids fluttering, and her voice came out dry but joking. "Are you still here? Or am I dreaming you again?" Keanu smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "If this is a dream," he said, "then neither of us wants to wake up." She chuckled weakly, then winced, her body reminding her that even joy had limits now. The chemo had started again. The prognosis wasn't good. The doctors were hopeful, but careful. And Kim had always been the realist. Keanu tried to read to her, tried to make her eat, tried to be the strong one. But the truth was, inside, he was breaking. He'd seen death. He had carried grief. But this was different. This was the person who had walked him to school, who punched a boy for teasing him, who built him up after every failure, who called him her warrior, even when she was the one in battle. And now she was slipping through his fingers like sand, smiling, pretending, fading. One afternoon, when she was asleep and the nurse had stepped out, Keanu noticed something odd under her pillow. A small folded envelope, not thick, not formal. It looked handmade, as if it were torn from an old journal. Curious, he hesitated. He didn't want to invade her privacy, but something in his gut twisted, a whisper of urgency. With trembling fingers, he slid the envelope out and turned it over. Written on the front, in her familiar loopy handwriting, were 4 words. To my brother, Keanu. His heart stopped. He wanted to put it back. Pretend he never saw it. Maybe it was just an old note. Maybe it meant nothing. But something told him this was no ordinary letter. This was her voice, captured in ink, saying what she couldn't say aloud. He opened it, and as he read, the room seemed to disappear. If you're reading this, I either chickened out of telling you in person, or I'm gone. Both options are possible. You know me. Keanu swallowed hard, his vision already blurring. I've spent my whole life being proud of you. Not for being famous, not for being Keanu Reeves, the actor, the star, the legend. I'm proud of you because you never stopped being the boy who held my hand when we were scared, who slept on hospital chairs, who learned to braid my hair when I lost it to chemo the first time. You were always so quiet, so gentle, but you carry pain like no one else, and you carry the world's pain too. You let it live inside you, and I've watched it eat you from within. I didn't want to tell you about the cancer because I know what you'd do. You'd drop everything. You'd stop living your life to watch me fight for mine. But I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll say yes. Keanu's fingers trembled as he turned the page. Live for me. Not around me, not because of me, but for me. You've given this world more than it deserves. Now I want you to take something back, find joy again. Take that motorcycle trip across the mountains. Write that novel you always said you'd write. Love someone again. Deeply. Recklessly. Without fear. Don't just exist, Keanu. Don't hide behind kindness. Live like you did before you knew what pain was. And if you ever doubt your strength, remember, you carried me through 2 lifetimes. I love you. Your sister. Always. He couldn't breathe. He pressed the letter to his chest, eyes shut, body trembling with silent sobs. He hadn't cried in public in years. He had taught himself to be still, to be composed, to hide the ache beneath silence. But this time he broke, not because of the loss, not yet, but because of the love. Her words had wrapped around his heart, squeezed it, reminded him of the boy he used to be before the world decided he had to be strong all the time. When Kim woke up later that evening, she found the letter folded neatly back under the pillow, with a single note beside it, written in her brother's careful handwriting. I'll live. I promise. But what neither of them knew, not yet, was that someone else had read that letter too, and they were about to make a decision that would send shockwaves across Keanu's quiet world. The stranger outside her door. 3 days passed in a strange, floating silence. The hospital became a second home. The beeping machines, the soft shuffles of nurses in night hours, and the bland smell of sanitized hope. Keanu barely left Kim's side, sleeping in the recliner chair beside her bed, sometimes reading to her from old books they both loved, sometimes just sitting in the quiet as her energy waned and returned in unpredictable tides. His promise to her, to live, echoed in his head constantly, but he didn't know where to start. How do you begin again while someone you love is slipping away? On the 4th morning, as sunlight filtered through half-open blinds, there was a knock at Kim's hospital room door. It wasn't a nurse's polite tap or a doctor's gentle signal. It was firmer, unfamiliar, cautious, but deliberate. Keanu looked up, expecting perhaps a volunteer or someone from the foundation. But when the door opened, a man stepped in, tall, maybe in his mid-30s, dressed in a plain gray coat and holding a small black folder. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, not coldness, not warmth, just a quiet intensity that made Keanu sit up straighter. The man nodded politely, first at Kim, then at Keanu. "Sorry to intrude. Are you Mr. Reeves?" Keanu didn't answer immediately. The way the man spoke didn't sound like a fan or media. He seemed official, but not corporate. "I am," Keanu replied slowly. "Can I help you?" The man stepped closer, setting the folder gently on the table near the foot of the bed. "My name is Elias. I work with a private research institute. We monitor and support patients in advanced stages of illness, particularly those with rare genetic resilience patterns." Keanu frowned. Kim opened one eye, amused. "So, you're like a science scout?" she joked, her voice still weak. Elias smiled faintly. "Something like that." Then his tone shifted. "Your sister is an anomaly. Our data systems flagged her blood profile from a shared oncology database. What we found was extraordinary. She carries a very rare genetic marker, one that has only appeared in 3 people on record. All 3 of them survived final stage, cancers without relapse. 2 are still living, and now your sister is the 3rd. Keanu blinked. "Wait," he said carefully. "You're saying she has a gene that can fight it off again?" Elias nodded. "Yes, but it's more than that. It's not just resistance. It's regenerative, and incredibly rare. Our team believes that this marker could hold the key to a new kind of treatment, something we've never seen before. But we need her permission to conduct full-scale testing." Kim stared at the man. Her hand gripped the blanket. "And what happens to me?" she asked quietly. "If I say yes?" Elias hesitated. "You would need to undergo several invasive extractions. We would be taking marrow, blood, and possibly neural tissue samples. The procedures come with risks, pain, fatigue. But if successful, you might not only survive, you might be the reason millions do." Silence fell between them. Keanu looked at Kim, heart pounding. He didn't want her to suffer more. He didn't want her to become a test subject. But he also saw the light flicker in her eyes. Not fear, not confusion, but purpose. She had always wanted to matter. Now she could matter more than she'd ever imagined. "Do I get a say in how it's used?" Kim asked. "Or will some company turn me into a patent and sell my cells for billions?" Elias paused, again, then said, "Our institute is independent. We don't sell data. We release our findings open source. We believe medicine should belong to the world, not to shareholders." Keanu still wasn't sure. He had spent his whole life distrusting promises that came with folders and polite smiles. But then Kim reached for his hand and whispered, "Keanu, maybe this is my way to live, even if I don't make it." Those words shattered him, because they were so purely her. And before he could say anything else, Kim turned to Elias and said, "I want to do it, but on one condition." Elias tilted his head. "My brother has to be with me, every test, every moment." Keanu's jaw tightened. The weight of that promise was huge, but he nodded. "Always," he said. But what none of them realized was that someone else had followed Elias to the hospital, someone who had been watching Keanu from a distance for a long time, someone who had their own plan, and that plan was about to begin. The woman in the red scarf, the days that followed, unfolded like a quiet storm. The hospital room transformed into a temporary lab. Machines rolled in, specialists arrived, tubes and wires became part of Kim's daily rhythm. She bore it all with a calm that surprised everyone. Everyone except Keanu. He had seen her fight before, and even in her frailty, she wore the same quiet strength that had once scared bullies away and lifted their family during the darkest winters. The researchers moved with care, but urgency clung to their movements. They were in awe of her biology. Every sample told a story no one expected, a silent rebellion written in her cells. And through it all, Keanu never left. He held her hand during every extraction, read her pages from old poetry books when the pain was too much, and made her laugh with stories from their childhood. Stories neither of them had spoken of in years. But as his days became consumed by needles and scan reports, Keanu began noticing something odd. A woman. Not a nurse. Not a doctor. Just someone who seemed to linger. At first he thought she was a visitor from another room, maybe a family member walking the halls. But then she appeared again, and again, always near the elevators, always wearing the same long red scarf. Her face was calm, unreadable, but her eyes were never still. They searched for something, or someone. Keanu didn't say anything at first. Maybe he was just paranoid. The hospital was large. People came and went. But when she appeared for the 4th time in 3 days, always around the same hour, always staring in the same direction, toward Kim's room, he finally said something to a nurse. "Do you know who she is?" he asked. The nurse looked down the hallway, then shook her head. "No one from this wing, not on record." That night, Keanu stayed up in the chair by Kim's side, pretending to doze. Around 2 a.m., when the hallway was quiet and the overhead lights dimmed to soft amber, he slipped out of the room. The elevator hall was empty. But the scarf, that red scarf, was lying on the floor, draped neatly over a bench. He picked it up slowly, and a small folded note slipped out. His name was on it. Keanu. He opened it, hands tense. "I'm not here to harm her. I'm here because of what she carries, what you both carry. I'll explain everything, but not here. Tomorrow, rooftop garden, noon. Come alone." Keanu stood there in silence, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. What did she mean? What you both carry? Was she another researcher? Someone from Elias's team? But if that were true, why the secrecy? The next day, despite everything in him screaming to focus only on Kim, he went. He couldn't risk ignoring it. Too many strange pieces were beginning to stack up. He walked up the stairs instead of taking the elevator, a habit from another life, and pushed open the rooftop door. Sunlight greeted him, harsh and blinding, but the wind carried something cooler. Peace. The garden was quiet, the small trees rustling softly. And there she was, standing near the railing, her long coat fluttering, the red scarf now tied loosely around her neck. She turned to him as he approached, her face more defined in daylight. Maybe in her early 40s, skin weathered by travel or time, but with eyes sharp enough to cut through pretense. "Thank you for coming," she said. Keanu didn't waste time. "Who are you?" She took a breath. "My name is Soraya. I work with a global medical intelligence unit. We track unique genetic patterns across families, mutations that don't occur by chance. And your sister, she isn't the first." Keanu narrowed his eyes. "The first what?" "The first Reeves," she said, "to survive something she shouldn't." He blinked. "Your grandmother, Helena Reeves. In the 1950s, she beat a form of lymphoma no one survived back then. Your father, he once survived a head injury that should have left him paralyzed. And you, there's something in your blood too. Your ability to heal, to absorb trauma, to resist certain compounds. You've been tested before, quietly, on film sets, during checkups. Samples were sent, through third parties. They flagged anomalies. But no one had a name to connect it to, until your sister surfaced again." Keanu's heart began to thud. "So what are you saying?" he asked. Soraya looked at him, her expression grim but honest. "I'm saying you and your sister might be part of a genetic cluster that holds the blueprint for regenerative medicine. And there are groups out there that don't want that research to go public. His stomach turned. What kind of groups? Private labs, silent investors, biotech arms of weapons manufacturers. If your sister's data goes open source, it could undo billions in controlled treatment patents. It's not just about curing disease. It's about controlling who gets to be cured. Keanu took a step back, his breath shallow. You're telling me she's in danger? Soraya nodded, slowly. Not yet. But the moment her data hits the wrong database, she will be. Keanu's hands clenched. So what do you want from me? She looked at him, dead serious. You need to get her out. Before someone else decides she's worth more as a lab. Sample than as a sister. And at that moment, Keanu realized the award, the stage, the applause. None of it mattered now. His sister's life had become a battlefield, and he was going to protect her, no matter what it cost. The last promise, the hospital corridors, stretched before Keanu like tunnels of quiet dread. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he walked quickly, Soraya's words spinning in his mind like a storm. She's in danger. Not maybe. Not eventually, but now. The thought clawed at his gut with every step. Behind every clipboard, every smiling doctor, every casual hallway glance, he began to see a threat. Not because he was paranoid, but because for the first time, he realized that Kim wasn't just his sister anymore. She had become something far bigger. A vessel of potential. A miracle locked inside flesh. And some people didn't want miracles. They wanted ownership. As he entered her room, Kim was sitting up, thin and pale but glowing with a strange light. She was smiling at a nurse who was adjusting her IV. When she saw Keanu, her smile widened. "Guess what?" she said, voice soft but hopeful. "They think the new protein readings are promising. They said if it keeps trending, I might actually go into remission again." Keanu forced a smile, trying to let her feel that hope, even as something inside him burned with panic. He sat beside her, took her hand, and simply held it. The warmth of her fingers grounded him, made it harder to say what he knew had to be said. But then she spoke again, more quietly this time. "You found her, didn't you? The woman in the red scarf." Keanu froze, his eyes locked with hers. "How did you know?" Kim shrugged lightly. "She's been following me since before the tests began. At first, I thought she was just curious. But then I saw how she looked at you." She paused. "Not like a stranger. Like someone who knew something we didn't." Keanu felt the truth land between them like a stone. He took a deep breath. "Kim, they're not just here to help you. Not all of them. Some want what's inside you, not for medicine, for profit, for control." Kim didn't react with fear. She only looked down at her trembling hands. "So what do we do?" Keanu tightened his grip on her fingers. "We leave. Tonight. Soraya has a safe route. There's a clinic in Norway, off-grid, real doctors, no corporations. We stay there until your samples are safe, and until you are too." Kim closed her eyes. For a moment, Keanu thought she was going to protest. But instead she nodded. "Okay, let's go." What followed was a blur of motion and whispers. Keanu moved like a ghost, slipping through security protocols with Soraya's guidance. She had disguised documents, unmarked transport, silent allies inside the building who believed in protecting people before patents. By midnight, they had wheeled Kim out under the guise of a transfer. Keanu pushed her gurney, heart pounding, at every checkpoint, pretending to be calm while every muscle inside him burned with fear. They reached the parking lot. The van was waiting, but just as Keanu opened the rear door, a sharp voice rang out. "Mr. Reeves." He turned. A man in a black coat stood near the emergency doors, holding a clipboard that didn't look like any hospital document. His tone was polite, but his eyes were wrong, Flat, cold, rehearsed. We need to speak with your sister. Her latest samples have been requested by an international partner lab. Protocol requires... Keanu didn't let him finish. He stepped in front of Kim and said firmly, "We're leaving. She's already discharged." The man smiled thinly. "You don't understand what you're interfering with." Behind him, another man appeared. Then another. 3 in total. Soraya stepped out of the driver's seat, calm but alert. "Get her inside the van," she whispered to Keanu. He moved fast, lifting Kim gently into the back seat, her arms clinging to his neck. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "Whatever happens, don't stop driving." But before Keanu could shut the door, one of the men reached inside his coat. Not a clipboard, a syringe. Keanu's instincts kicked in. His arm shot out, slamming the van door shut, trapping the man's hand before he could inject anything. Soraya threw the van into reverse, tires screeching. The men stumbled back, shouting, but it was too late. They were gone. The van sped through city streets, weaving through midnight traffic like a silver ghost. Inside, Kim was shaking, her breathing uneven, her head resting on Keanu's shoulder. He held her close, whispering the only thing that felt real. "I've got you. I've got you." They drove through the night, then boarded a private transport arranged by Soraya's network. By dawn, they were in the air, heading toward the edge of the Arctic Circle, to a quiet place where the noise of ambition could not follow. Weeks passed. Kim's condition stabilized. The clinic used her samples with her consent, real trials, real transparency. And slowly, hope began to grow again. Not manufactured, not sold, but earned. Keanu would sit with her every morning, watching the snow fall outside the windows, wrapped in the kind of silence that felt safe. One morning she looked stronger, color in her cheeks, fire in her eyes. She reached into her bedside drawer and handed him something. A book, handwritten pages, a novel. His name on the cover. "You said you'd write again," she whispered. "So I started it for you." He opened it. First line. He lived his whole life watching others disappear, until one day he chose to stay. Keanu smiled, tears rising, heart full. He would live. He would write. He would carry her story. Not because she was sick, but because she was more alive than anyone he'd ever known, and whether she made it another year or 100, she had already done the impossible. She had changed the world, starting with him.